It started with a letter, not a friendly note, not a neighborly reminder, but a thin white envelope slipped under Emma's door, printed with the official seal of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. The paper was stiff, formal, and cold to the touch. Inside, a message written in the kind of polite language that hides a threat. You are in violation of community standards. Emma stared at the words, her stomach tightening. They were talking about her garden, the small patch of color and life she'd built outside her home, the one thing that made her little corner of the neighborhood feel like hers. They called it non-compliant landscaping. She called it peace. At first, she thought it had to be a mistake, maybe a mix-up. Maybe someone on the board had the wrong house. She'd followed the rules. She'd paid her dues. But what she didn't realize then was that this letter wasn't the beginning of a misunderstanding. It was the start of a quiet war. And soon, she would discover just how far one woman and one HOA would go to break her spirit. Because in Willow Creek, beauty wasn't just about lawns and fences. It was about control, and Emma was about to break the one rule nobody dared to touch. She was about to stand up to the people who thought they owned everything. Before all of that, though, things were perfect. Or, at least, they looked that way. Willow Creek was the kind of place realtors bragged about. A community built on harmony and shared values. Neatly trimmed hedges, mailboxes painted in approved colors, driveways spotless enough to reflect the sky. Every house looked nearly identical, every smile rehearsed. On Sunday mornings, the air smelled like fresh cut grass and quiet competition. When Emma bought her house, she thought she was buying peace. After years of renting small apartments and dealing with noise and chaos, the stillness of Willow Creek felt like a blessing. She'd worked for this. Late nights, tight budgets, years of saving, and when she stood in her new garden, coffee in hand, morning light spilling across the porch, she thought, this is home. She planted flowers her mother loved, wild lavender, daisies, a few bright marigolds. They weren't landscaped in the strictest sense, but they were alive. She wanted her garden to breathe, to grow in its own rhythm. She wanted it to feel human. That's when Linda Carver appeared. The first time they met, Linda had a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mid-50s, pressed blouse, perfectly coiffed hair, clipboard tucked neatly under one arm. The kind of person who looked like she'd been born in charge. She introduced herself as the HOA president and welcomed Emma to the community with a firm handshake and a compliment about her charming little garden. It seemed friendly, almost too friendly, but in hindsight, that was Linda's gift, making her control feel like kindness. At first, it was little things, a suggestion to repaint her mailbox to match the new color scheme, a reminder that decorative lawn ornaments were discouraged. Emma nodded, smiled, thanked her, and went on with her day. But then came the comments that carried a sharper edge. Your fence is a little higher than regulation allows, Linda mentioned one afternoon, eyes flicking toward the posts. Another time, we've had some concerns about your choice of flowers. They're lovely, but not exactly uniform with the neighborhood aesthetic. Uniform. That word stayed with Emma because it wasn't about beauty. It was about sameness. Still, she tried to play along. She wanted to fit in, not fight. She'd worked too hard to find this peace. But the first letter made that impossible. Violation. Unauthorized vegetation. The phrase made her laugh out loud. At first. But the more she read, the colder she felt. The HOA demanded she remove her garden or face escalating fines. The letter was signed by the board, but Emma knew whose hand had guided it. Linda Carver. Emma decided to talk to her directly. Maybe she could reason with her. Linda welcomed her into her home. Spotless, organized, and silent. Everything in its place. Not a single speck of dust or stray color. It felt less like a home and more like a museum. Linda smiled as Emma spoke, nodding politely. Then, when Emma was done, she said in that calm, sweet tone, we all have to make sacrifices for the good of the community, dear. We can't have one house standing out. It disrupts the harmony. Another word that didn't mean what it sounded like. Emma left that day angry, but still hopeful. Maybe she could compromise. Maybe they could meet halfway. But within days, another letter arrived, this time with a fine attached. Then another, and another, each one harsher than the last, each signed by the same cold, bureaucratic hand. The garden she'd loved so much became a target. People whispered as they passed. Cars slowed down in front of her house. The neighbors who used to wave now pretended not to see her. And at night, sometimes she'd catch the faint sound of footsteps near her yard or a camera flash in the dark. Someone was watching. Her safe, peaceful home now felt like a cage. And that's when she realized this wasn't about flowers. This was about power. Linda wanted control, and Emma was the only one in Willow Creek stubborn enough to resist. But the thing about people like Linda is they never expect pushback. They're used to compliance, to quiet acceptance. What they didn't realize was that Emma had already lost too much in life to be bullied again. She was done playing by their rules, because the next time Linda Carver tried to break her, Emma would be ready, and she wouldn't just fight back quietly. She'd do it in a way the whole neighborhood would never forget. After that day, something inside Emma shifted. The fear, the self-doubt, the endless second-guessing. It all hardened into quiet resolve. If the HOA wanted a fight, they'd get one. But she wouldn't scream. She wouldn't rage. She would document every letter, every visit, every fine. She started a file. Names, dates, photos, copies of emails. At first, it was just to protect herself. But the more she uncovered, the more she realized something was deeply wrong. The HOA wasn't enforcing fairness. It was enforcing control. She found that fines were being issued unevenly. Some neighbors never received so much as a warning for bigger violations. Meanwhile, others, mostly newer homeowners, were being targeted again and again. One evening, as she scrolled through the HOA's public budget report, something caught her eye. A line item that didn't make sense. Thousands of dollars marked as beautification expenses, all tied to companies that didn't seem to exist. When she cross-checked the names, her stomach turned. They were all linked to Linda Carver's husband's business. It wasn't about community harmony. It was about profit. Emma's frustration burned into something sharper. Righteous anger. She started talking to her neighbors, carefully, discreetly. A few brushed her off, afraid to get involved, but then she found others who had stories too. Unfair fines, arbitrary warnings, even sudden property assessments that seemed designed to push them out. For years, people had whispered about Linda's grip on the HOA, but nobody had ever stood up to her. Until now, the harassment escalated. A board member came to Emma's door one morning, camera in hand, saying he was documenting violations. Another claimed her fence paint was too reflective. Her trash cans were cited for being an inch off the curb line. It was absurd, petty, and exactly how they kept control, by making life unbearable for anyone who questioned them. Emma started filming too, not just the harassment, but the silence that followed. The way neighbors would pause their conversations when she stepped outside. The way Linda's smile lingered a little too long when she passed by. Every image, every sound, every word recorded. Weeks passed. The fines piled higher. The letters grew more threatening. And through it all, Emma stayed calm, because by now she had a plan. It started small. A social media post, carefully worded, anonymous. Has your HOA ever gone too far? She wrote. What if your dues weren't being used the way you thought? Within hours, it spread. Dozens of comments, some from her own community, hiding behind vague usernames, others from nearby neighborhoods, with eerily similar stories. People were angry and tired of being silenced, but Emma wasn't done. She filed a public records request under the state's Homeowners Association Transparency Act, something she'd stumbled across in her late-night research. When the financial documents arrived, she laid them out across her dining table and felt her pulse quicken. The numbers didn't lie. The HOA had been funneling money into private accounts, and every transaction led back to one person, Linda Carver. For years, she'd used the board as her personal piggy bank, hiding behind bureaucracy and fear. Emma didn't sleep that night. She sat in the glow of her laptop, scrolling through document after document, her fingers trembling, not from fear anymore, but from anticipation, because now she had proof. She contacted a local journalist, someone known for exposing small-town corruption. The reporter was skeptical at first, but when Emma handed over the files, the tone changed instantly. They promised to look deeper. The following week, something incredible happened. Linda called an emergency HOA meeting. Mandatory attendance. The entire neighborhood packed into the community center. The air was thick with with tension. Emma sat near the back, silent, clutching a folder of evidence in her lap. Linda stood at the front, smiling her practiced smile. "It's come to my attention," she began, "that false and damaging rumors have been circulating about this board. I want to assure you all that these lies will not stand." Her voice trembled, just a little. She knew something was wrong. Then the doors opened. The journalist walked in with a camera crew. The crowd went still. Mrs. Carver, the reporter, said, voice calm, "Would you like to comment on the misuse of HOA funds and falsified expense reports?" The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's face drained of color. She tried to speak, but words failed her. The board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Emma stood slowly, calmly. She walked to the front of the room, the file still in her hands. "You said this community was built on harmony," she said quietly, her voice steady. "But harmony without honesty isn't peace, it's control." She placed the file on the table. Dozens of pages, copies of everything. Linda's hands shook as she reached for them. The cameras caught every movement, every twitch, every crack in her perfect composure. That was the moment everything changed. The meeting dissolved into chaos. People shouting, demanding answers. The board tried to contain it, but it was too late. The truth was out. Within days, the news broke publicly. Local media picked it up. HOA president under investigation for fraud and harassment. Neighbors who had once avoided Emma now knocked on her door, offering apologies, food, even flowers. Linda resigned. Her husband's company was audited. The HOA was forced to restructure under state supervision. For the first time in years, Willow Creek was quiet, truly quiet. But the silence wasn't tense anymore. It was peaceful, honest. Emma didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She'd won something far more powerful than revenge. She'd reclaimed her voice. In the weeks that followed, she tore out the old fines, shredded the letters, and replanted her garden. Lavender, daisies, marigolds, the same ones that started it all. Only this time, they grew freely. Wild, bright, untamed. Neighbors began planting their own flowers too. Slowly, the perfect symmetry of Willow Creek gave way to something more real. A patchwork of individuality, of color, of life. One afternoon, as Emma tended her garden, a new resident stopped by. Young couple, moving in down the street. They asked her what the neighborhood was like. Emma smiled. "It's better than it used to be," she said softly. And when they glanced at her yard, the burst of colors, the hum of bees, the scent of lavender on the breeze, she saw the same expression she'd once had. Hope. Later, that evening, as the sun dipped behind the rows of houses, Emma sat on her porch, coffee in hand. She watched the lights flicker on one by one. Families laughing, dogs barking, kids playing in the yard again. The fear that once hung over Willow Creek was gone. In its place was something stronger, a quiet defiance that would never fade again. Emma knew she couldn't change the past, but she'd done something better. She'd changed what came next, because in the end, revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about exposure, about truth, about making sure the powerful could never hide behind their polished smiles again. And somewhere in that stillness, between the rustle of her flowers and the sound of sprinklers in the distance, Emma finally felt what she'd been fighting for all along. Freedom, the kind no HOA could ever take away.